Good evening, Paul. How you doing?
All right, call the meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will make motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Councilmember Henry and a second by Councilmember McKnight. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Community comment. If there's anybody who's interested in speaking about anything that is not on the agenda for this evening, now's the time to do so. Going once. All right. Public hearings. Mr. Lannis for the municipal stormwater system.
Okay, you bet. Here, if Larry got you on the edge of your seat, this is really going to get you up. So,
We can't wait.
Excuse me, Mary, do you want to open the public hearing so we can get Dan's comments into the record?
Sure. Let's see. So we'll open the public hearing. Let's see. Okay.
all right. Well, I'll walk through why you just did that, and we'll just note that this is all required. We have to do it every year, so you'll probably hear it again next year. But I'll buzz through it the best I can here. We're at the 2019 annual stormwater meeting. You're holding the public hearing here. It's the municipal separate storm sewer system permit requirements, and that's going to refer to that as MS4. Okay, so what are the goals here? Is to inform the public of impact on stormwater discharges as it pertains to pollution. Offer the public an opportunity to comment on the efforts and any concerns they have that would be needing to be adjusted to, and then give an update on the status of compliance on the MS4 permit as you are a permittee of the MPCA. So that's really what this is about. It's a required process that we have to go through, and hear any public comments, and that will go into the permit reissuance. So what is an MS4? As a reminder, a municipal separate storm sewer system is a conveyance of the, well, I'll just put it simply. If you're collecting stormwater and you own the infrastructure and you're a governmental unit, you're an MS4. So that's effectively really what it comes down to is you're a government unit that has a stormwater system, and so therefore you're a permittee under the state, and that is what we're talking about today. So this is going to be under Minnesota Chapter 7090. I'll let Larry here. We have to do it every year. It's a requirement as a permittee of the state, and you meet the requirements in an urbanized area as MS4. You were authorized in 2006, and you are currently implementing many BMPs, which is called Best Management Practices, as outlined in your Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, which is the SWIP. So what is a SWIP? We just mentioned the spelling here a little bit backwards here, but the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program effectively is a mix of things that it includes regulation, what people cannot do, education programs, educating people on why they're not supposed to do it, inspection programs, catching people that are doing things they're not supposed to do, and maintenance, maintaining those stormwater systems that have to clean the water, and then of course documentation to prove that we're doing what we're supposed to do. So that's the whole process. And that's what goes into a stormwater pollution plan. It's laying all those things out as here's the plan, and here's what we're gonna do to follow it. So this is about commitments to the MPCA. It's they're executing new requirements defined in 6 minimum control measures: public outreach, public participation, illicit discharge, detection, basically, catching pollution sources and trying to correct for it. Stormwater from construction sites is an issue, and then post-construction stormwater management after everything gets built. How do we take care of it? And then we call it good housekeeping, and basically doing the best we can to keep things in working order. So. Some of the highlights, what has the city done in 2018 under the requirements of this permit? You have to inspect 20% of your system every year. It's city stormwater ponds and outfalls. That's no small task. Every pond that's out there has to be looked at some point in time. The intent is every 5 years you're going to run through the entire system and try and catch deficiencies and ultimately have a plan to correct those deficiencies. So 20% of those ponds and outfalls were inspected here, and then...
Can I interrupt? What's an outfall?
Stormwater discharge piping here, so that's any location the pipes discharge.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Completed inspection on all stormwater BMPs, best management practices. That can be any number of things. That's rain gardens and anything that is intended to clean water is a best management practice. And subdivisions, many of the subdivisions are inspected. That's part of the deal to stay compliant is you have to inspect your subdivisions as they're going in to make sure they're not causing problems with the plan. Plans for 19, submit the annual report to the MPCA, prove that we're doing the right thing. And then there's going to be some clearing around the stormwater ponds that Brian is really going to be taken on to make sure that the ponds are accessible and maintainable. Inspect another 20% of the system. Inspect all structural treatment devices. There's certain structural elements out there that actually take stormwater in there, and they're intended to clean the water before the water leaves it. So there's certain devices out there that need to be looked at. Always looking to improve documentation, make it a little bit easier. The more streamlined we can make this, the less problematic it is that there is so much documentation. So that's going to be certainly part of it. And then there's the permit reissuance, and that's an annual reissuance to state you're complying. So timeline for what to expect here. There's the pre-public notice review of the draft MS4 permit reissuance. I was just talking about this with Brian. This gets a little confusing as to how we're mixing issues. They go through a reissuance of the permit every so often, and that reissuance can change the rules and requirements of this permit that we're obligated to stay in compliance with. Right now, they're in a period of saying, here's some of the new rules and regulations that we might go forward with, and they're looking for some feedback, and that's the stage we're at right now. And I've got a few, bullet points on what they're looking to change on this next reissuance. But that's a big one. I mean, there could be some very real impacts with the reissuance, and so they're looking for comments, and I'll note one of the bigger ones that we see here. And then they would have a public notice and review of the MS4 general permit reissuance in July. That'd be the formal release for comment. This is kind of what do you think of our ideas? The next one in July is here's our new rules. We're going to give you a certain amount of time to comment, and then they would actually come back later in the fall with the reissuance of the general permit, which is the new permit requirements that every MS4 would have to fall under in order to be permitted. So, yeah.
So in July, they're going to ask you for your input on their new rules?
Right now, they're asking for the what do you think of our ideas type of a stage, and then in July, they'll officially say this is what we are going to be asking for comments on. So they've kind of done like a preliminary solicitation of comments is what they're looking for. So
This will change just the way that all of our ponds and overflows operate.
The reissuance could change the way what you have to go through in order to get permitted for various construction projects.
And that'll be all at the city's expense?
Yeah, however it breaks out, yeah. So cities, developers, anybody that's got skin in it, yes.
How often do they change these rules? Every year?
I believe it's a 5-year cycle. I've got Aaron Schmidt here just because there's so many different elements here. He's more versed as I am on
He's
on
back there
some of
nodding
this
his
stuff. So, yeah, I believe it's 5 years. There's a lot that goes into the little nuances of the program, but I believe it's a 5-year cycle. Then each year is an annual reissuance of the permit. So it just so happens that we're following on that reissuance of the rules. But anyway, so January, February. Well, I'll just skip to the end here. You know, the February by that time it should have a reissuance of coverage to the city for the new rules. So potential new MS4 permit requirements. This is where it gets into what they're doing to change the possible permit rules that we're under here. This is the number one item here is the top must account for new and fully reconstructed impervious surface when the sum equals 1 acre or more. Right now, if you add an acre of impervious to a project, you have to treat that water, and there's a lot of regulations that happen when you do 1 acre of new hard surface. They're toying with the idea of changing it to 1 acre of a disturbed hard surface, and that's a really big deal. Is that any street reconstruction project that is 1 acre of impervious already, all of a sudden is going to get hooked with going back and trying to find ways to treat and manage that stormwater that was normally reserved for new impervious being added to a system. So all of a sudden, all these jobs that are just reconstructs that we're putting it back the way it was before, you're not getting into the stormwater, management rules. Now you're going to go backwards and say every retrofit that you do a project on, it might come into play. So this one is going to be met with tremendous resistance all over the place, I would expect here. So certainly we'll be making comments on that one, and I don't know if it's actually going to make it into the formal comment period or not. They might, in this what do you think phase, get enough resistance that maybe it goes away. But if it shows up again, it's certainly going to be something to pay attention to. So that's probably the bigger item of this topic is what becomes of that item, and then they're focusing on education of stormwater issues, de-icing salt, pet waste each calendar year is another topic here. There's a development of regulatory mechanisms to require pets to properly dispose of pets' feces on public and private property. These are new additions to the rules. I'm not sure how you're going to follow through on backyard pet feces, but they might be trying. So,
No, public shaming is not working in my neighborhood.
yeah, yeah. Well, they can make the regulation.
To the rightful owner.
People are taking pictures and posting it.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Public shaming.
Oh.
Still not effective. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, they don't always have the ideas on how to actually make it happen, but these are the regulations they're thinking about adding. So,
Good luck.
yeah, we'll have to have a solution to some of these, at least in some fashion, in order to meet the new permit requirements, should it stay in there. And then salt storage is another one that they pay attention to make sure salt is not getting into the water bodies. And as always, increased documentation. So as they increase documentation, we have to find ways to make it more automated. And so that's going to be part of it as well. So future program needs, update the stormwater pollution program in 2020, implement the pond assessment plan, and improve, obviously, efficiencies. This is a cumbersome program to a degree that, the more we can do to make it automated, the better. So that's going to be part of the goals. So I think I won over Larry on that one. I'm sure this was not your favorite thing to be going through, but it is a required annual need, and so hopefully you'd open it up to any public comments and ask any questions from here on out. So,
All right. Those wishing to address the city council should come forward and state their names and addresses for the record. After all comments are received, the public hearing will be closed and no further comments on this issue will be received at this meeting. Any public comments? Hearing none.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
And that,
We have a motion by Councilmember Mock and a second by Councilmember Henry. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Dan. That was awesome.
can I just ask one
That
question?
was so enlightening.
Just because I feel like I need to. So I noticed that the app, is it the application? What is the form that you also attached after your, I'm trying to find the front of it. Hold on. Scroll. The partner document that it looks like that's our sort of proposed response, right? So there's areas that, where we say, no, we haven't done that, and what is our corrective action? So I noticed in a lot of the, here's my question. From a City of Carver perspective, where is our biggest challenge to stormwater management? Is it the new construction that's going on, or is it existing development?
Well, Brian certainly, you can chime in on that one. I'd say new construction generally is easier because you get to start from scratch on how you want to lay it out. Existing is much more difficult, generally speaking, to correct past issues and fix them, because generally, in order to manage stormwater, you need space, and generally that space wasn't built into existing infrastructure. So it gets a lot harder to go back into, imagine a tightly dense downtown area and try and retrofit a lot of solutions into that area. It's, it's costly and it needs space. New construction, it just gets built into the whole process and the program. So I guess in my opinion, it's a lot more difficult to deal with the old stuff than the new stuff. So, but Brian, if you have any comments on that, feel free.
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Just one thing, Mayor and Council. Councilmember Sayer had a question related to how the city kind of manages the day-to-day operations of stormwater ponds and inventories, how, when certain ponds are inspected, et cetera. And so I've asked Brian just to give an overview to the council of how that program works from a daily operation standpoint. Brian?
Yeah, so one of the things we do to manage this is we work with Bolton Mink in our GIS program. So all of our stormwater ponds are inventoried, and we have an inventory of all of them, all of our outlet structures. So all the BMPs that we have, so we have certain manholes that are extra deep that collect sediment and that we have to clean out. So all those are marked within our GIS. It's something that and how we keep track of that. Dan had mentioned that we do 20% of the inspections yearly. Those are all tracked, and we do a different 20%. So we try to get through a certain percentage and get to all the stormwater ponds, over a period of time. Obviously we're driving by them all the time. We start seeing pond elevations raising or different things. We'll go into those areas and clean off the outlets. So sometimes they get plugged up with cattails and stuff like that, so they're cleaned up. Imagine there's turtles in them and everything else. We've had some outlets plugged up with turtles, so we do have to manage those and actually see them all the time. So we get phone calls from residents and we respond, based on some of those other features. And also cleaning up around the ponds. We have a lot of tree growth around them, which starts kind of hindering getting into these areas and doing inspections. So cleaning and maintaining those kind of as we go forward and trying to do kind of a public awareness at the same time we're doing that with people living around there. So, but the big piece is working with our GIS program and kind of inventorying everything we have in their drainage areas. Does that answer or kind of clarify, clean that up a little bit?
So we have, if you go through 20% of them a year, basically it's a 5-year cycle, correct? Is there going to be retro costs to the other 80% each year, or is that going to be upfront cost?
Well, generally, your inspection is geared towards identifying your problems and seeing if it's operating intentionally,
Right.
or as intended. The costs come from where you're not to standards, or you're not seeing what you want to see, and then, you know, there ultimately is cost in many cases to digging out ponds and cleaning them up, and so, yeah, that can get to be substantial, but the inspection isn't necessarily where your real capital costs come from.
So, Brian, do you choose your 20% annually, or are they already figured in each one each year?
Right now, we work with Bolton and Mink, and we select that 20%, so, and we try to get in a rotation. So once we get through that first 5 years, now we kind of start doing the inspection. So they'll be the same ones in that year cycle.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? No? All right. Moving along, I think that brings us to the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Councilmember Mock and a second by Councilmember McKnight. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business, the 2019 bonds. Mr. Steinman.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council.
Evening.
Maybe I don't need my glasses since we'll run off of this. So I'm sure this will be the most exciting of the three presentations.
Big
So,
competition for that tonight.
I know. No one else has embedded video, I bet.
The bar.
Larry?
You brought your A game. I like that.
Vicki, I hope it works now. I hope it works, So, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'm going to present three components to my being here. First is this PowerPoint presentation about the basics of bonds, and we'll go into some specific detail about your bonds to prepare you for the next item on your agenda, which is my presentation on the recommendations for your upcoming issuance and your consideration of the resolutions related to the sale of the bonds. So I usually try to keep these presentations kind of high level but sometimes people tell me I'm too high. One person laughing, that's it. But I don't want to make assumptions here about how much you know or what you don't know about bonds. So please stop and ask me. Ask any question. If you're debating whether it's a question somebody else will have, just imagine to yourself, Larry has that question too, and then ask it. Larry, I'm glad you're here tonight. So, really, I hope that this takes about 15 to 20 minutes, so to manage expectations here. We'll talk a little bit about the municipal bond market, high level again. The authorities to issue debt in Minnesota, some of the high points of those. And then lastly, specifically about your two series of bonds that you're issuing, that you'll be selling on the 15th of July. So the first bullet is the most important. When you're selling bonds, you're entering into a contract with the bondholder to borrow money. So you're borrowing money from the investor, the bondholders, and you're promising to repay based upon a certain repayment stream. So it's a contract between you, the issuer, and the investor, the bondholder. We're issuing bonds that are tax exempt. That means they're exempt from federal and in Minnesota, state taxes. That makes them a lot less. Technically, it makes the bond more expensive, which makes the interest rate lower. Those two things are inversely related. So you get the best interest rate possible when you're borrowing at a tax-exempt rate. The federal government manages, though, how much tax-exempt debt you get to sell every year, and it comes with a lot of requirements and such that we'll talk about a little bit later here. But taxable debt is a lot more simple. In the right-hand side here of the shows a little chart about who buys municipal bonds. If you have mutual funds, you definitely have bonds, maybe even City of Carver bonds in your mutual funds. Who knows? Bonds that are sold in large denominations, like if we're selling $10 million of bonds over 10 years, $1 million a year. Most folks that own those are institutions, property casualty companies, commercial banks. Your bonds offered this year in July, let's take the $5 million Series B, over 20 years is small enough that you'll have households that buy those bonds, mutual funds, money market funds, but some retail investors. And so that you don't have to hear me talk the whole time, we'll try the short video. I told Vicki if it didn't work, I would have to dance. But she was hoping it worked. Super. 3.5 minutes.
When a state or local government decides to issue municipal securities to finance a public project, it typically will hire financial professionals to get the bonds into the hands of investors. These financial professionals include securities firms known as underwriters, as well as the use of municipal advisors. The state or local government initiates the process of hiring an underwriter, either by selecting a firm or sending a request for proposals to a number of firms in the case of a negotiated offering, or by accepting bids more broadly for a competitive offering. Once selected, the underwriter acts as an intermediary between the state or local government and investors by agreeing to purchase all the bonds from the government and resell them to investors. The underwriter assumes financial risk when purchasing all of an issuer's bonds. As such, underwriters often share this risk by forming groups or syndicates. The underwriter and any syndicate members are in an arm's length relationship with the state or local government. The underwriter's incentives are to earn a profit selling the issuer's bonds, and they have financial interests that differ from those of the state or local government issuer. Underwriters are required by law to act fairly and not engage in deceptive or dishonest practices with either the issuer or investors. During a bond offering, state and local governments may also hire a municipal advisor.
That's me.
To provide financial advice and represent their interests in negotiations with the underwriter about the structure, pricing, timing, and distribution of the bonds to investors. Unlike underwriters, municipal advisors have a federal fiduciary duty to their government clients and are required to act in their best interests. When a state or local government issues bonds, it typically prepares a document known as an official statement that explains the bond's features and characteristics. The official statement is the issuer's document. The state or local government discloses in the official statement important information about its financial health and ability to repay the bonds, as well as a description of the key features of the bonds themselves. The underwriter either provides a copy of the official statement to investors purchasing the bonds, or provides information on how to access a free electronic version of the official statement on the Electronic Municipal Market Access, or EMMA website at emma.msrb.org. When the bonds are issued, the issuer also signs a so-called continuing disclosure agreement, committing to make available on the EMMA website certain annual financial information and other ongoing updates. These ongoing disclosures inform both investors and the marketplace about the issuer and securities and support transparency. Once the bonds have been sold, the state or local government deposits the funds into an account for safekeeping until it is time to pay for the project. The Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board regulates underwriters and municipal advisors, promotes municipal market transparency through its EMMA website, and provides investors and issuers with objective educational resources to help them make informed decisions. For more information on the MSRB and access to up-to-date resources, visit the MSRB's website at www.msrb.org.
Super. Any questions about that video? I am your municipal advisor. And we will be selling your bonds through a competitive offering, not a one-on-one negotiated offering with an underwriter. So we'll bring back to you bids from several underwriters, and then we'll walk through the bids and recommend your selection of the best one. And we'll do that on sale day, July 15th. So there's a whole bunch of different laws that relate to issuing municipal bonds. We won't go through them all, federal and state law. The types of municipal bonds along the right-hand side here, the most common type in Minnesota anyway, have general obligation security. That means that they're secured by the taxing powers of the issuer. This is what you're selling. Both your Series A, 2019A and 2019B are general obligation bonds. That means that they have the best, they offer the best security for the bondholder / investor, and that brings to you the best interest rate possible in the market. And ultimately, it means that you will levy to repay the bonds no matter what, up to all the way to and through a court telling you that you are required to levy to repay the bonds. That offers a lot of security to the investor. So that is the most common, those are the most common types of bonds offered. Revenue bonds don't have a general obligation security. They are only paid from the revenue source, whether that be water, sewer, storm. So that revenue source doesn't quite have the security of your taxing authority. So that brings with it a higher interest rate. You're offering this issue also as general obligation revenue bonds. So there's some a piece of general obligation water in there. I think there's a piece of general obligation sewer in there as well. We'll go over that specifically when we get to your bonds. And we'll just skip the last one, high level. Credit rating. So all your bonds will be rated by one of the three major rating agencies, in your case, Standard & Poor's. Right now, you are a AA, Standard & Poor's AA. That's along the right-hand column at the top. That says high quality. And basically what that tells the investor is that they don't have to do all the investigation into your credit risk themselves. They look at that AA, they see the letters GO, and they look at that the letters AA, and they understand how to bid and what their credit risk is from those letters. And those letters also determine your interest rate. Obviously, higher risk equals higher interest rates. Cities like yourself have the ability to raise property taxes to pay debt. Investors know that. Municipal bond defaults are significantly lower than corporate bonds as well. I mean, if you can see on the chart there, municipal bonds are a significantly less risky investment than corporate bonds. And this is why you sell bonds. So you might just say, well, why don't we just walk into the bank and borrow money like I do to buy a car? 5 years, 5%. This is why you sell bonds, because then you could take advantage of this thing called the yield curve. Each year in a series of bonds has a different interest rate. So if you buy a 5-year bond, this Carver bond, if you go out and buy the 5-year maturity, you'll pay 3.3%. If you bought the 1-year maturity, your interest would be about 2%. So every year's maturity all the way out to 20 has a different interest rate attached to it. So that lets you take advantage of the early years where interest rates are lower versus the lag years. These are the most common types of bonds sold in Minnesota. If you look at the center column there, GO-CIP bonds, CIP stands for Capital Improvement Plan bonds. These are the bonds that you sold to build your city hall 2 years ago, I think. The primary payment source, property tax levy. The use is new facilities in your case. There are debt limits associated with this type of debt by statute, and it has reverse referendum attached to it. We don't have to go into that as you aren't selling this type of bond this time, but you are selling geo improvement bonds. The column on the left, 429 bonds as they're currently, or as they're mostly referred to. The primary property payment source is your property tax levies, and then you have special assessments that you levy against benefiting properties, and when those property owners pay their taxes, those specials come back to you, so you're basically financing their project through the sale of bonds. You're also selling geo utility revenue bonds in this issue also, right? So you have a water piece and a sanitary sewer piece. I think we'll go through that. Again, your primary payment source is the enterprise fund that you're selling from, so the water fund, sewer fund, but it's backed by your ability to levy in case they don't have the funds available to pay that portion of the debt service. So these are the specifics of the bonds that you're going to offer for sale on the 15th of July. There are two series, 2019A for $1,075,000 general obligation tax increment revenue bonds, and a 2019B, which is $5,095,000 general obligation bonds is the title, but they have a variety of purposes which we'll go over. This is a single purpose series. It's a tax increment revenue bond being sold to generate dollars to build Commerce Drive next to Lakeview. The total project cost is $2,072,000. I'd be using my fancy red laser here to gain more points, but it doesn't work on this TV. So the total project cost $2,072,000, of which almost half of that is coming from a deed grant in the amount of $997,000. So this is the first page, always in our analysis, sources of funds and the uses of funds. And when you're an issuer and you get all these pages, you would go to this page and you'd easily be able to see the whole project, how it looks, and you go to the deposit to project construction fund and ask yourself, is there enough money in that fund to pay for the things that I'm wanting to buy from this borrowing? In this case, it's $1,994,000. There are costs of issuance. We'll talk a little bit about this capitalized interest fund without drowning you. And then there's the underwriter's discount in here as well, which is the fee that the underwriter takes to market your bonds. I'm going to go to this one. Go one more if you would, page 23, because I think it's a little bit easier. So bonds are paid typically on August 1st and February 1st. Interest is paid on August 1st, and principal and interest both on February 1st. So if you look at the dates on this this is your tax increment revenue bond. So the only source of revenue for this bond is tax increment. The project that is generating tax increment is today under construction. So in Minnesota, that means you construct in, this year is 2019. In January of 2020, your property is assessed for taxes payable in 2021. Well, you might ask yourself, we're selling bonds today, and we're not going to have revenue until 2021 to pay them back. So you'll see how each of the dates there along the left-hand side, those are payment dates. So you have a payment due on August 1st of 2020. That's next year, and you don't have any tax increment revenue. So we use what is called a capitalized interest fund. There's two payments there from it. It is a fund that's generated by increasing the size of the borrowing. So a lot of folks don't like capitalized interest because you're borrowing money to make the first payment. We try really hard to avoid it. In some cases, you just can't. You have a project that requires you to pay contractors, and you don't have revenue for a couple of years. We did avoid that with the City Hall project by delaying the issuance. In this case, we would have to delay it till next year. So that's capitalized interest fund. But remember that all, your bonds are paid on 8/1 and 2/1. So when increment follows taxes too. So taxes, property taxes are paid May 15. They go to the county. The county writes a check to the city, and the city gets the check in July. This is property taxes. And they use, from those property taxes, they use the money to make the 8/1 payment each year. The rest of the property taxes are paid October 15th. The county collects them, sends them to the city in December, and they use the December payment to make the following year's February 1st principal and interest payment on the bonds. So the bond calendar is a little bit askew of the regular calendar. And then we'll just back up. This is just a simplified version of that same, it just rolls all of the August payments into that February payment to make the chart smaller. Okay, so this is your 2019 B. This is a relatively complicated issuance because it has 5 separate purposes, as we call them, 5 separate uses of bond funds. The first along the left-hand side there, the street improvement portion, that's for your street project. You have a water well project as well that you're borrowing $1,025,000 for. You have stormwater improvements of $470,000, sewer improvements of $65,000, and general fund equipment of $815,000. And again, this, if you don't look at anything else on the many pages that we send you, this is the most important page sometimes because it shows you the sources of funds and all of the ways that you're going to use the funds. So you have street projects, you have a fire engine that you're paying for, that you're levying for, a mower, a sweeper, a jetter, salt machine, other equipment. So everything is there. Everything you see there is what you're funding with the sale of these bonds. So I want to talk just for a moment too about something that will happen on the 15th of July, and that is that these are all projections that we run. We project the interest rate based upon comparables in the market. When we structure these bonds, everything is preliminary till the day of the sale. When the sale comes in, we have actual coupon interest rates. We fill in all the blanks, and like magic, it comes out. It's real. What will happen on the 15th of July, because this issue is of such a large enough size, is that you'll get a bond premium. And this is important. Other than the sausage making involved in getting to how a premium is generated, it is basically additional dollars that show up as an additional source of funds. So when we bring this sheet to you on July 15th that evening, it will show an additional source of funds there called bond premium. And just think about this logically. If you had another source of funds for this project, you'd make one of two choices. You'd either upsize the project or you'd downsize the amount you had to borrow, right? Those are your two choices on sale day as well when you get a bond premium. You might have project overruns or something that we're aware of at the time that we get the bid that we could then use the premium on, or you can just reduce the amount that you borrow. Again, we have to get sources and uses to match. The way we would do that if we have one other source is just to reduce the amount that you borrow. That's really important because Brent and other staff members have to have direction from you to make that decision before we get here to award the sale that evening. We need to know the answer so that we can have the final structure, so that we can tell the underwriter what the final structure is. And so by the time we get here that night, that decision has to already be made. Usually, let's use the TIF bonds, for example. That might be easy. It seemed like it was a little tight on the costing of that project, and maybe we could use, if there's a $40,000 or $50,000 premium that shows up, we might be able to use it. If it shows up here, it's gonna be our discussion on the day of sale, whether or not, how you wanna deal with the premium. Higher interest rates come along with bond premiums. So these investors are buying bonds at a premium price. And along with that price come higher interest rates. So the only way that you can kind of negate the higher interest rates, which you're going to get anyway, is to reduce the amount that you borrow. Use the premium to reduce what you borrow. Reducing what you borrow reduces your debt service a little bit, and it kind of accounts for those higher interest rates. So that's a lot of sausage making probably on the bond math, but it's important before we get to the sale date to understand that piece.
And just one addition to that, Mayor and Council, so past practice in the city, since I can't call each of you and say, should we take the bond premium, because that'd be a violation of open meeting law, I'll get the call from Paul, and he'll say what the premium is. I contact the mayor and say, we were offered X amount of premium, based on what the amount is. We'll say either we're gonna put it toward debt service, or we're gonna use it for the project. So that's what I am suggesting that we would follow. Whatever the premium number is, I connect with Mayor Johnson, and we then connect back with Paul, unless the council had some type of initial feedback tonight. But without that, I can't connect with each of you and get a up or down just because of our open meeting law requirements.
Just that.
No objections, and thank you for explaining the process. Myself, I'm new to this part of the council role.
I mean, I assume by that point in time, we'll know a little bit more if we expect any overruns or something like that, so that you could make a recommendation saying, oh, we are aware of some additional overruns, we might want to put it towards uses of funds.
So I can add, every time the city's had a premium, at least in my tenure, we've taken the premium and applied it toward the project. And as it goes with bonds, if you don't, you have to use it toward the project that you've listed. And so in my mind, the worst case scenario is if you don't spend that, then it just goes back to paying the debt service. And so, for example, I think the bond premium on the city hall bonds was like $70-some thousand. And so just because of the unknowns related to what we were going to find once we kind of dug the hole, we accepted those as some additional contingency. And I think, based on the construction issues related to, not necessarily the equipment portion, but the 2019 project, Commerce Drive, digging a well, there's certainly some pieces that are unknown. It isn't treated as like, oh, we have extra money. It's treated as an additional contingency to provide some cushion.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I don't have any concern.
Okay, good. So this is another important schedule. It's called your net debt service schedule. So as related to your 2018A TIF bonds, there's no levy that is anticipated. We're anticipating that tax increment will cover 100% of the debt service, and that there will actually be excess. So no levy anticipated on the 2018A. Or 19A. The 19B, there is a levy associated with these bonds. And you'll see it here as we walk from left to right through the principal, the coupon, the line of coupons there is also a good way to track. Again, what I was saying earlier about how each year has a different interest rate with it, that's how it looks. Every year has a different coupon rate. Your interest calculation, your total principal and interest, 105% of that total, the 5% for contingency and by state law. Your assessments, those are dollars coming back to you through the property tax system after you have assessed the benefiting property. So that's revenue to you. And then you have also the utility, we call them revenues in this schedule because utilities are paying their share of this $5,075,000 or $5,095,000 issuance. The utilities are paying their share. And what's left The right-hand column is the levy that you're required to levy. The first 10 years, about 225,000 on average, until your fire engine's paid off. And then the remainder is the street project, about $120,000 a year, over 20 years for the street project.
Okay, I gotta walk through this slide. Okay.
Okay?
So the assessment, that's the 20% that we're assessing residents to pay for the street improvement project. The utility revenues, why do they end in 2035?
So the utilities are, we have sewer improvements, we have stormwater and water and equipment. They all have different terms.
Okay,
I think, for example, one of the pieces of sewer equipment was the jetter.
yeah,
With 65,000, you're not gonna pay for that over 20 years. That would
totally,
be-
got it, okay,
that has a 2-year term.
okay,
So you can see 197 and 199, and then the jetter's paid for, and then
Okay.
it goes down to 160. So all of the other sewer equipment, I can't remember, the vac trailer, the sweeper, they all have different terms. We try to match
Okay.
the term with the net revenues
got
of
it.
the
So
utility.
it's the total term, the sum of those terms is 15 years, not the full 20 of this bond.
Right,
Did I say that
so
right?
I'll tell you, the total of those terms, yeah, well, here, I'll tell
Because
you.
we're only applying utility revenues while we have those terms, during those terms.
So the street improvement portion is 20.
Yep,
The water improvement portion is 15.
okay,
The stormwater improvements are 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. The jetter is 2 years. And the general fund equipment is 10 years.
okay.
So-
That's why, so we're only applying those utility revenues while those specific terms are
Are outstanding.
active.
Yep.
Outstanding, that's a
Yep.
good term. Okay, I got it.
And Councilmember McKnight, one piece, so the stormwater project, a large part of that, probably 80% or more, is attributed to the 2019 project. So the 2019 project, there's several stormwater improvements that are being done, but the stormwater improvements aren't able to be assessed, so they were separated from the 2019 project, and so they're sitting in this 444 issuance.
Yeah, so we had to do this education on a complex bond issue. Think back to the 2019A is simple, one purpose, easy. This has multiple purposes, multiple funds, and each is tracked separately so that administration can know which fund to pay which purpose, which portion of the debt service out of, how long each, so it's relatively complicated, but
Well, we'll be bond experts. It's fine.
yes.
Okay,
test-
so then
test
the
is
levy
coming.
required column is the delta, right? So that's the additional that the city has got to figure out how to come up with levy
Right. That's-
increases to meet that
That's correct.
each year. Okay,
That's what isn't paid by assessments or utility revenues.
got it.
Is the levy.
Okay, thank you.
And this takes that levy piece one step further on the right-hand side. That's your fire truck? And there was something else in there too. Right, Brent?
Yeah, there's.
Fire truck and.
So the $1 million for,
mower.
public, I think it's 500 some for the fire engine, and then there's some public services equipment that wasn't utility related that's contained
Yep.
within that.
So 650 for the fire engine, 95 for a mower, and 50 for a salt machine. So that's your debt service schedule for those 3 pieces of equipment, and it's 100% levy.
And this is a one additional detail, so when we get into the 2020 budget, within the general fund, there's basically 2 columns that we ask the council to add up. So one is the general levy, which covers police and public services, administration, planning, et
Day-to-day.
cetera, engineering. So we budget that all in one column. Then there's a separate levy for the bond, payments. And so you'll see the levy required in the right column but then there'll be a series of the 6 or 7 other bond issuances the city has done. And so those are all line items, so you can see that. And
So
then,
we'll see each one. So we'll see like the city hall, we'll see each one of these.
right. And then every 2 to 3 years, the city will engage with ABDO and we'll do a debt study where they'll look at the existing fund balances within each of the debt funds. There could be there are times where the levy that we pay is going to be different than what is shown on these books because there's additional funds available that weren't spent, or assessments came in earlier where people prepaid their assessments, so there's more resources to pay for levy. So this is what we start with, but it changes over time as the payments are made.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is just constructed from comparables. There, when you get the final debt service information, that's what you use for your budget discussions. And then, of course, with each issuance comes cost of issuance. We separate out our MA fee by the purpose, by the different purposes. There's bond counsel fees in here, there's a registrar, there's a rating agency fee, the proportionate share, because the rating agency is gonna rate both the A and the B, so the TIF bond shares with this Series B. Printing the official statement, and then some miscellaneous travel costs, et cetera. So,
Larry, would you mind sharing with the council your explanation of how bond counsel works? So the city will not work with Larry Harris as a city attorney on this. We'll work with, and have worked with for many years, Mary Ipple of Briggs and Morgan. But Larry, if you could just give a description of that and of Mary, et cetera.
In order to issue bonds, you need a specialized opinion that goes along with the issuance. In order for anybody to buy these bonds, they require an opinion from an attorney that's commonly called a bond counsel. In order to be a bond counsel, there's sort of behind the scenes process that goes through, and you get basically listed in a book. The city of Carver, for over 40 years, has used Mary Ipple at Briggs and Morgan as their bond counsel. So what bond counsel does is they not only issue the opinion, they prepare the authorizing resolutions, they do all the behind-the-scenes work. Candidly, I don't think anybody in the council's ever met Mary Ipple. I don't know that she's ever been to a city meeting. I mean, she might have been. But she's a go-to, long-term, reliable individual that, Spring said, well, Baker Tilly and I've worked with for years. I had 1 or 2 miscellaneous questions about this that I'll pose to Mary. And that's kind of it. But she's a huge resource for the city, has been, and regularly gets involved in conversations with Brent, and to a lesser extent me, about, a year in advance when the project's coming up. How are you gonna do it? What can you do? How can you structure it? What avenues are open? A really big resource, but one that is kind of nameless and faceless to you.
and your underwriter fee isn't what we call a cost of issuance, but the underwriter fee is in the uses of funds that you see on the first page, and that for this issuance will be about $60,000. And then there's a whole host of other bond sale documents, and you'll see some of these. Probably the most important here, the official statement. That's your statement. That's your official statement. It's like a prospectus, and it contains an awful lot of really, really good general information about the city of Carver as well. So reading through that will be good. And our lengthy disclaimer. Any questions? I'm sure that it was all just, we got straight A students up there, otherwise you'd never get elected, so, right?
Right. Any questions?
No questions?
No, nothing else.
I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve Resolution 131-19, providing for the competitive negotiated sale of 1,075,000 general obligation tax increment revenue bonds, Series 2019A.
I'll second that.
Got a motion by Councilmember McKnight and a second by Councilmember Henry. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 132-19, providing for the competitive negotiated sale of 5,095,000 general obligation bonds, Series 2019B.
I'll make a second to the motion.
We got a motion by Councilmember McKnight and a second by Councilmember Sayer. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
So Mayor and Council, now that you have considered the resolutions that I was going to describe to you,
Oh,
that's okay.
sorry.
There was not going to be any debate about whether that was really just a resolution that isn't even legally required. But it's a good resolution because it puts us all on the same page to, hey, I'm coming back out here on the 15th of July to sell bonds, and at that point, we don't want you to say, what are we doing? So the two resolutions, they basically agree to the structure that I laid forth for you already, and the important dates to remember in the process. The 15th, oh, my computer just died. The 15th of July is the sale, I think. I'm 99% sure. The 15th of July, and then before that, myself, Brent, and Aaron will have a rating call with Standard & Poor's, again, to determine a rating for these bonds. I don't have any expectation that your AA will be anything other than a AA at this stage. And otherwise, I'll see you back here on the 15th of July. Or if it's not the 15th, I'll be here on the day that it is. No one's looking at the schedule.
I wrote it down. It's the
You
15th
said
of July.
you said the 15th of July a couple of times.
Is that a
I wrote it
Monday?
down.
If that's a Monday, okay.
Yeah, it's a Monday.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, super. Anything else?
Nope, thank you.
All right, you're
so.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mayor and
you.
Council. Thank you.
Great video.
Great video,
I win.
very clear.
All right. Moving on to 9.2 Mount Hope Road parking. Mr. Lannis.
Okay, no videos here, just a PDF slide here. So it's back to the parking discussion on Mount Hope Road. There was some discussion at our last work session here about some modifications to the recommendations. Ultimately, the recommendation that we would designate some additional no parking zones along this roadway. There was some feedback about limitations to that on the would be the south end of it. We had no parking at south of 5th Street was the big cutoff here. So what you're going to see here is the parking restrictions that would be recommended based on the street widths that are out there and based on the review that was done, and that ultimately is what you'd be here to determine tonight, is implementing these parking restrictions. So, is there any questions on the information here?
Any
This is
questions?
what we asked for.
Yeah, this is
So this is what we asked for. So my question is, did you have the slide with the neighborhood comment opportunity? It's in our packet.
Oh, that's,
No, you didn't. Okay.
that didn't come up here.
It's all right. So it says on there that we're encouraging residents and businesses to attend our meeting, but we're not having a public hearing. How do we
Yeah,
handle
so,
that?
Councilmember McKnight, so you can take public comment without having a public hearing.
Oh, okay.
So, if the mayor would like, we could open it up for public comment at this point.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, any public comment? Going once? Okay. So yeah, this is exactly what we discussed 2 weeks ago during the work session.
Nope.
I don't have any comments.
Nope. I still like it.
I still like
you.
it.
I'll make a motion to adopt additional parking restrictions along Mount Hope Road as presented.
I'll second that. Oh, Glenn, go ahead.
We have a motion by Councilmember Mock and a second by Councilmember McKnight. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 2019 budget amendment. Mr. Merrick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So tonight we're bringing forth a budget amendment. This is typically something that we might do on an annual basis where we have an idea of some of the budget parameters or issues that have come up through the year that weren't necessarily apparent to us during the normal budget process. And so one of the areas relates to building permit revenue. We were unsure related to two projects, Carver Ridge, which is the senior housing facility, and Lakeview, when that permit revenue was going to come in. And so often you'll get the permit revenue in a year, but then the inspections happen the year later. And so we built in some safety parameters to accommodate for that. However, the permit revenues came in 2019, and so the first step in the process then would be for the council to amend the building permit revenues, and then also take away the need to do a special capital fund transfer. And so how that would have worked is if your permit revenues would have come in 2018, you would have had a surplus in 2018, and so that would, the surplus as per council policy would have went into the special capital fund, and then you would have in turn transferred that out. That's not needed. The second piece relates to Southwest Prime. Earlier in the year, the city council authorized up to $15,000, and so we found a line item, and I just want to be clear within the table, and so there's $4,500 in an existing line item that's not for Southwest Prime, but that's the line item without having a specific line item. I'm saying line item like 1,000 times right now. So we're planning on $10,000 just based on the amount of use that we're seeing. And so that line item would be amended by $10,000 to $14,500. As a side note, the folks from Southwest Transit did reach out. They're at the precipice of starting what they're calling Prime MD, which is basically a service that takes folks to their doctor's appointments as an extension of Prime. And they're going to be preparing an amendment to their Prime contract that they have with the council and asking for consideration to adopt. So we'd be, if the council would approve, we'd be using this same line item to pay for those expenses. The third piece relates to salary grade adjustments. And so the recent compensation study recommended compensation or grade adjustments, pay grade adjustments for the utility billing clerk and the building official. And so we're asking for an amendment to the budget to accommodate the grade adjustment because we want to make the commensurate pay adjustments. And then we're also for asking within that $7,600 additional budgetary expenses for the creation of a community development director. The community development director would manage the operations and planning, building inspections, and related to economic development. And so we're looking to start that position in July. We're anticipating, unfortunately, the resignation of our building official, Mark Pistolka, to another northern suburb in the state of Minnesota. So we're going to hopefully get him back to your July meeting to give him the farewell that he deserves after many years of great service to the city. And then finally, one of the areas, and I'll give Brian Skolk a lot of credit for this idea, is related to street maintenance. So we'll have street maintenance. We have a street maintenance budget right now. It's about $61,500, but there could be times where, based on bids or based on time of year, schedules, etc., you might not use all that in a given year. And so the way the general fund works is anything that's not spent is absorbed into the general fund, and if there's a surplus, it goes into the special capital fund, and then it's not tied to anything. And one of the challenges is the street projects that we're doing, and Brian can get into this if the council has questions, but you're seeing far less seal coating as a remedy for kind of ongoing street maintenance, and seeing a lot more mill and overlay projects, which are more expensive, but to my knowledge and what I've been told, are a lot more productive as it relates to long-term street maintenance. And so what this move does is, instead of letting the street maintenance funds that the council puts in the general fund budget, you take that money and we push it out into a special street maintenance fund. And so no matter the time of year, it basically serves as a savings account for street maintenance projects, and you're not limited to making sure that that all those funds are spent in that current year. And so what it frankly avoids is, if you, let's say we had $40,000 sitting in the street maintenance fund in November, we might feel compelled to try to hurry up and do a project before those funds get absorbed. This way, whatever the council would budget in 2020, let's say it's 61,000, you'd right away put that into the street maintenance fund, and it would be compounded with the 2019 funds. For a couple years, the city received money from the state of Minnesota for small cities. It's called the Small Cities Account, which was also road funding. So that money can start to accumulate, and over time we want to build that, but it really focuses and it excludes that money from kind of the rest of the operation. And so we think this would be a good budget move for the council. So you have a resolution in effect to the items that I had mentioned. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
So in that hypothetical example, where you had your 40,000 and your 61.5, would that be 105,000 or 101,500, and then whatever other we put into the budget for the following year?
Correct. So right now we have 60-some thousand from the street maintenance account, the small cities account that the state put in. We'd be taking the 2019 allocation and adding that to that 61,000, so you'd have 120,000 in the account. There's been some miscellaneous expenses related to that, but it provides more of a isolated area to keep that money, so that if it's not spent in a given year,
It can be
doesn't
spent
get
the following year.
absorbed. And so really you're just guaranteeing yourself that money, that whatever you set aside for street maintenance is going to be used for street maintenance.
More of a dedicated fund.
Correct.
Other questions?
No.
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 129-19, amending the 2019 budget.
I'll second that.
Got a motion by Councilmember Mock and a second by Councilmember Henry. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Communications.
I don't have anything. We have our Carver Business Alliance meeting on Friday, so look forward to that.
I don't have any updates. July 8th, there's another Parks Commission meeting.
Two quick things. Last week, Glenn and Brent and Aaron and I participated in the ribbon cutting at the Chiropractic Specialists of Carver. So they're open for business, which is kind of cool. They've got a pretty neat facility there, kind of by Carver Dental and Children of Tomorrow, right in Carver Square. The other thing, I just wanted to remind people to lock their doors. There have been a rash of break-ins and robberies. It was Thursday night in Victoria, and then they visited Carver over the weekend. So these are crimes of opportunity. Lock your doors.
So we had an HPC meeting last week that was, we didn't end up having a quorum, so we are rescheduled for tomorrow night. So we will have that tomorrow. Brian, I have one question for you. We had talked about the corner of 3rd Street in Jorgensen with some of those repairs of the sod and things like that. I did talk to the homeowners, or the one homeowner there, I should say. He's very excited about that. Do you have any idea when you'll be doing that?
I don't right now. We're hoping to have it done here within the next 2 or 3 weeks is what we're hoping to have done.
Okay, sounds good. And then for the July 1st meeting, I will not be at the work session for sure. My plane is landing at 5. So if I can be here for the meeting.
You could do it if you tried hard enough.
Yeah, no problem. Barring that, we get just delayed by another day, darn it. But no, so I will do my best to be on time for the meeting. If not, I will be at the meeting. I just can't say that it will be right at 7.
We did not have a planning commission meeting, so I got nothing.
All right. Dan? Brent? Aaron? Larry? Back row? No? All right.
Make motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Henry and a second by Councilmember Mock. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I'm gonna run over behind Lisa's real quick and see if those technical plans are there for you too. I'll be right back.
I'll just swing by, 'cause